Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Stephanie Dray to talk about her novel, Becoming Madam Secretary. Becoming Madam Secretary is a fictional biography of Frances Perkins, the first woman to serve in the US cabinet as the Secretary of Labor in FDR's cabinet. But in this novel, we learn not just about Frances's professional achievements, but we also get insight into her personal life and her struggles raising a family. But before we get into the episode, pretty please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave the podcast a 5-star rating, and write me a review if you love the show. Alrighty, listeners, thanks in advance, and now onto the episode with author Stephanie Dray. Hi friends, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me to talk about Becoming Madam Secretary is Stephanie Dray. Hi Stephanie, welcome to the Reader's Couch.
Hello, I'm honored to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on. Can't wait to talk about Becoming Madam Secretary, but before we get there, how excited are you? I know this isn't your first rodeo, but what has this experience been like with this new book?
I am very excited because it has been 4 years since my last release. The excitement is really built. I've been living and breathing this novel about the fabulous, legendary Frances Perkins for 4 years, and I can't wait to share her with the world.
Yay! I'm so excited and I'm thrilled to be a part of that because I would love listeners to hear straight from you. Tell us about your new book, Becoming Madam Secretary. What's your elevator pitch, but also what can readers expect when they pick up a copy?
This is a book about a powerhouse of a woman with a parasol and a plan to save America. She was the most important woman in American history. That's a big claim, I know, but I'm going to stand by it. And I am sure that when readers finish my novel, they're going to agree with me. She was our very first female federal cabinet secretary. She served under FDR during the Great Depression and the Second World War. She is our longest serving Secretary of Labor. And I cannot wait to tell you not only about all of her accomplishments, but about the remarkably exciting and sometimes tragic life that she led.
Yes, I think what I loved most about this book is that you gave us a good balance between both her personal life and her professional life, because she did really amazing things professionally and she had challenges as a woman would of that time, even though women are still facing challenges today. But I want you to share with listeners a bit about her from the beginning. She went to school. She was studying childhood malnutrition. It was part of her master thesis at the time. And she was studying more specifically economics and sociology. Tell us about her early beginnings, her interest in people in this way to obviously go to school to study and learn more, because it is clear that she cared so much about children's rights and just workers' rights in general. Tell us about her early beginnings before she became a cabinet member.
So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about Frances's family history because it's important to understanding her. You've mentioned that she was going to school when she came to New York City. She was already a graduate of Mount Holyoke College, and getting a college degree at this time in history, at the turn of the century, was very unusual. But Frances had a family whose roots stretched back to the Revolutionary War and even before then. And she knew that one of her kinswomen was Mercy Otis Warren, who was the first female historian of the American Revolution. So there was a history of female scholarship in the family, and they were very proud of their role in building the American Republic and also preserving it during the Civil War. One of Frances's uncles was a Union general who also founded Howard University for Black Americans. Frances already had in her blood a mission to help the country. She was a patriot, and she believed that you couldn't love your country without loving the people in it. She was already primed by the time she was a teacher at Ferry Hall, which is a prestigious girls' academy in Chicago. And she decided to volunteer for Jane Addams in some of the tenements in Chicago. And that really cemented her interest in the underprivileged and how she could serve. And so even though she really never envisioned a role in politics for herself, she was at the forefront of the social work movement before it even really had that name. And that is how she eventually landed in New York City, where everything in her life changed.
Yes, a lot changed with her life. And I love that you gave us that backstory as well. What I found interesting, because she ended up being a cabinet secretary, which was just a huge accomplishment in itself. But she had very differing views from the president at the time when they just met. So I found it interesting that when we think of history in terms of the New Deal and just all the different things that FDR did for the American people at the time, how the economy was bolstered and workers' rights and just everything. If I'm being honest, I never heard her name. I had no idea who Frances Perkins was. All I knew was just, okay, this is what FDR did, and this is what he accomplished under his administration. Tell our listeners about how much of a role she played, and also how her views differed from FDR, even though we think of him so much when it comes to workers' rights and the New Deal.
To understand their conflicts, we have to think about how they met. They met when they were quite young, and it was a lot of fun for me to portray them because they met at a tea dance. He was a young lawyer, and she was a social activist, and she found him completely unimpressive. She just thought he was a spoiled, snotty, Richie Rich who didn't care about anyone, a total dilettante. And he likely thought of her the way some of her contemporaries did, that she was a buttoned up blue nose, that she was an insufferable social activist. But really, they had a lot more in common than they thought. And one of the joyful things about this book was getting to portray their relationship as it evolved. And of course, it became a very long-standing friendship and a partnership that changed the country. Now, how they differed in terms of policy, I think they were mostly on the same page by the time they both landed in the White House. However, when FDR asked her to be a member of his cabinet, she handed him a list of programs that she wanted to initiate as Secretary of Labor, and she thought he would turn them all down. And instead, he said, yes, I agree with all of this, except for one. That social insurance idea, Frances, that's just crazy. And I always laugh when I read that because, of course, Social Security ends up becoming one of the signature achievements of FDR's domestic agenda. That's what he is known for. And she really had to drag him into it, kicking and screaming.
I think that's the most humorous part of the book, and just something I find incredibly funny. It was something he was most against, but again, it became something he was most known for. I also loved seeing the evolving friendship. I often find that sometimes when people disagree, and they have those discussions around their disagreements and seeing the world in a different way and how better to help people, that sometimes you can find great resolution and come up with great action plans. And they became great friends, like you said, and they had a long-standing friendship. What I also want you to share a bit about is also her personal life, because again, for me, it's mind-blowing that we have this woman who had a college degree, who was a huge activist at the time for children's rights, workers' rights in general. There were experiences that she herself witnessed that changed her as a person and made her even more. She became even more resolved in making sure that these programs and these policies were enacted. which is fabulous, but she also had a personal life. And she got married. She met Paul Wilson. He was an economist. He was from a well-to-do family. They went on to get married. She also had struggles to raise a family, and her husband also had mental health problems as well. So tell us a bit about Frances and her personal life.
I'm so glad you asked because I don't want readers to come away thinking that this is a novel about politics and policy. It certainly does have all of those things in it, but it's really the story of a woman's life and all the triumphs and tragedies she experienced as a woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a lover, as a friend. And her romance with her husband is something that I know she would not have liked my exploring in the novel. She was a very private person, but it's important to understand her and to give her dimension and to know that she was also a romantic. She fell in love with this brilliant man who was her equal in every way, a man who both challenged her and supported her in all of her career goals and her goals for raising a family. And they went through so much together. They battled infertility and they battled financial setbacks and ultimately what we now would know was bipolar disease. And it was not treatable in that time period. So she has this marriage that was truly founded on a wonderful basis. And we have to watch it disintegrate in the most tragic way because sometimes Paul was very lucid and sometimes he was terribly confused. And this was something that Frances struggled with even while she was in the cabinet. She had to commit him to an institution, and he escaped from that institution on the very day that Frances was present for the signing of the Social Security Act. So here it is, her biggest professional accomplishment in the world, and she's having to worry about her husband and the father of her child and whether or not he's going to be okay and whether or not their daughter is going to be okay and if she can find him.
I love the personal bits, I feel, more than anything else, because I think also it's very easy to just look at this woman and say, wow, she accomplished so much with her education, but also, again, being an activist, her professional life, being the first woman to be in a presidential cabinet. The accomplishments are amazing, but I love the dimension of her personal life, I think, the best, because I felt in that moment she came across just as an everyday woman, just trying to keep it together for her family. I love seeing her step back when her daughter was born, but then also go back to work essentially. I also love seeing her friendships and people around her. Share with our listeners a bit about the support system, lack thereof at some points, but who were the people around Frances during this time?
There are two relationships I want to call out and that I explored deeply in this novel. Even though Frances was extremely well connected and had many friends, some of whom I had to remove from the novel because I don't want it to be 1,000 pages. But one of the most fun friendships she had was with Sinclair Lewis, who readers might know. He was a Pulitzer Prize winning author. He wrote It Can't Happen Here, amongst many others. He was very funny, and he is one of the few people who could really get Frances to be silly and come out of her shell. She was always so guarded. She wanted to be thought of as a serious woman. And then Sinclair Lewis would come along and really poke at her in every possible way. And they would ride a ferry together and go to the beach, and they would make up stories about passengers on the ferry. And I just really loved seeing that side of her. And also their blossoming romance because he was very interested in her. He was in love with her. And you can tell because she is mentioned either directly or indirectly in many of his books.
Yes, yes. And they wrote many letters to each other too. And I think that dynamic is quite interesting. I think he was a good friend and confidant. So I like that balance of Sinclair in the book. So I'm curious. Exploring Frances, like you said, she had many friends. You had to cut some friendships from the book. I'm sure you had to cut stories as well. Tell me something that's not in the book that you discovered that you found quite interesting, but again, you just didn't have enough pages.
One of the things that I discovered is that Frances, there was a great opposition to her throughout her career, mostly because she was a woman. And ultimately, she took blame for things that other cabinet officers could do with impunity. But Frances was an easy target. So at some point, there was a failed impeachment attempt against her. And that was actually what first inspired me as an angle to take on her story. But in the end, I decided I really wanted to end on a high note, not on a low note. And that was very hurtful to Frances, even though she did triumph over that attempt in the end. So that is not in the book, but that's not to say I won't write about it someday. And I would like to circle back a little bit and talk about her friend, Mary Rumsey, who was her very best friend for about 25 years. They ended up living together when they were in Washington, D.C. Mary provided both emotional and financial support. She was a wonderfully accomplished woman in her own right. And the one thing that I had to leave out of the book is that there is a lot of speculation that they were more than friends. And I had to make a decision about that. And ultimately, I wasn't sure. I didn't have enough evidence. And I really wanted to take Frances at face value when she talked about the fact that she knew she had enemies who were always trying to find her in a compromising position, and she would never give them the satisfaction. And this also because she was married, and she took a very dim view of marital infidelity. So I left this a bit ambiguous in the book. So I don't know if I would say that's leaving it out of the novel, but it is being choosy about what I claim about another person's sexuality.
Right, right, absolutely. I was very fascinated with her after reading your book. So I started looking into more about her life. And the Mary Rumsey, she founded the Junior League, which was really amazing. I'm like, man, these are super accomplished women, especially for that time. And the fact that they did it, they lived together for practical reasons. And then also later on, she shared a home with someone else at a different time. I found the open-endedness of that to be all right because you really don't know. But that would be something interesting to explore. But like you said earlier, she was incredibly private. She was a very private woman. She also knew she had a target on her back,
That's right.
especially because, again, she was incredibly ahead of her time, I would say.
I would say not only was she ahead of her time, she was ahead of our time.
That is so true.
She had ideas that if we had put them into practice, we'd be in a much better spot today. She tried, this is one of the very few things that she failed at. She tried to get a national health care system in the United States. And it was the only thing on that little list that she gave FDR that she wasn't able to accomplish.
Absolutely. So I'm curious now, how did you discover this woman? Because again, like I said, for me personally, when I think about just America, both on a social and economic side, huge things happened under FDR. Had no idea who Frances Perkins was. How did you discover her?
I was aware that she was our first female cabinet secretary, but everything I had seen about her is really the image she wanted to leave behind, that of being a very serious woman who wore very dowdy clothes and was very matronly and projected the idea that she was very boring. So I wasn't attracted to her as a heroine until my very good friend and sometimes co-author Laura Camoy and we were looking into possibly writing about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And that is when I stumbled over a much younger Frances Perkins, and I was startled by my own arrogance to have forgotten that every person who is aged was once young. Frances was not always matronly and serious. She was once a stylish spitfire who did things like go undercover to bust pimps and human traffickers. So when I discovered that, I thought, I have to know more about this woman. And that's when it became very personal to me, because I have family members, my grandparents all lived through the Great Depression, and they all had stories about it. And some of them were funny, their little tales about how they were hunting frogs and squirrels and foraging for mushrooms in the woods to stay alive. But some of them were quite tragic. I lost an uncle who was about 16 at the time. He tried to steal coal from a passing train so that he could keep the family warm in a very harsh Rochesterian winter in upstate New York. And that was a very tragic tale that impacted the whole family. And I knew that my grandfather had joined the Civilian Conservation Corps shortly after, and he credited that as having saved the family. He was able to send home money. So they lionized FDR, and the New Deal was credited with the survival of my own family. So finding out that this woman was actually the architect behind many of the programs that even allowed me to come into being made me think I owe her a huge debt of gratitude, and I must write about this woman.
I love hearing that, especially the way you have your personal story and then recognizing that, hey, what this woman did had a huge impact on your family's life. It's so sad to hear about your uncle, but I think there's so many people out there with family members who have similar stories as well,
Yes.
because it was an incredibly tough time for folks across the world, quite frankly, but more specifically for Americans as well. I think it's amazing what you did in sharing her story, because like I said, I had no idea who she was. I had no idea to the extent of the role she played in these programs, and again, just uplifting the country during a really difficult time. So I think you did her quite a bit of service in this novel, and I'm really excited for more readers to pick up a copy and learn more about her too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another book of yours that I absolutely loved was The Women of Chateau Lafayette. Tell us about that one, just in case there's a listener here who's not familiar with that book.
So that was my last book that came out before this one, and it's definitely one of my favorites. It is about three women in three different wars who all had a part to play in the legacy of Lafayette, who was a revolutionary general who helped us win American independence and went on to be a part of the French Revolution. And ultimately, his castle ended up being a refuge for Jewish children during the Holocaust. And this is because three women carried on his legacy year after year, generation after generation. And I was so excited to show how they did this, how they passed the torch, and how we owe them to pick it up and carry it forward now.
Absolutely. I love that book so much. And just seeing the women carry on that legacy was just so beautiful to read. A series of yours that I loved was the Nile trilogy. So in that you have the Lily of the Nile, Song of the Nile, Daughters of the Nile. For listeners, again, who are not familiar, tell us about those books and the trilogy in general.
Oh my gosh, those were my very first historical fiction novels. Becoming Madam Secretary is my 10th historical fiction novel. So now we're going back to the beginning. That series was about the daughter of Cleopatra, who was a real queen in the ancient world, but she was more successful at being queen in some ways than her mother because she was not forced to commit suicide, which is why we have never heard of her. I wanted to bring her story to light. It was a story of the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire, and a sort of shift in world history that changed women's fates in a lot of ways. So it is magical realism. So there's a bit of Isis magic in that series, but it is also pretty close to the historical facts.
Yes, I am that person when I discover a book, and it happens a lot, especially with your books, that I discover something new and I'm like, okay, I want to learn more about it. So then I go digging and looking and I'll discover some additional gems as well. So it's fair to say your books are like the gateway into learning, into me learning more. Like you said, you have so many other books. Another one I read and loved was My Dear Hamilton. That was also really good. America's First Daughter. So, needless to say, listeners, Stephanie has lots and lots of books. So, if you get pulled in by this one, I know you'll probably end up down the rabbit hole because that's for sure what happened with me. But what would you say are the similarities between your books, but also the differences? Obviously, there'll be a different main character at the center. But what is the similarity or the thread that you would say runs throughout all your books?
Almost all of them are about the rise or fall of republics. Even this one, Becoming Madam Secretary, we might be thinking, oh, this is taking place in the 20th century. This has nothing to do with the rise or fall of the American Republic. But in fact, during the Great Depression, people considered it to be a condemnation of the American experiment. They thought it was over. Our toying with democracy was done. It was time to have a dictator and maybe change our entire economic system. And so we were really teetering. And I think of the New Deal as a refounding of America in which a new relationship between citizens and its government came about. So that is something that runs through all of my work. I know that I write mostly about women and their accomplishments because I want current day women to understand that we have always been part of history. And now that we have the vote, we have a responsibility to the women who came before us to use it and to shape history with the tools that they gave us.
Absolutely. These women have paved the way for us today. So I think it would be a really great shame to not get involved. A simple thing as voting, reaching out to your representatives, showing up to local meetings. We have more power than we sometimes believe. But looking back, Stephanie, again, you said it's book 10. I didn't even realize, oh my gosh, yeah, there are that many. But looking back now, what would you tell your younger writing self?
I would tell my younger writing self to have more confidence and write more things. I would get very bogged down in a manuscript and write it over and over again, always striving for perfection. And this is something that I still struggle with. I have to allow myself to write a crappy first draft, and it's very hard. But if I want to finish the book sometime during my lifetime, I have to let it go.
I think that is such solid advice, especially for perfectionists out there. I say I'm a recovering perfectionist. So things don't always go the way I want them to, but I just have to let it go and let be. So I loved hearing that because, in a way, you're speaking to me too.
Wonderful.
So I want us to jump into your reading life real quick. So share with our listeners the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
I just finished reading The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon, which I loved. It was set in the immediate aftermath of the American Revolution, and it's about a midwife. You might be thinking, I don't want to read about midwifery or childbirth, but this is actually at heart a murder mystery, and I could not stop reading.
I love that one too. Absolutely love that one too. So I'm happy to hear you enjoyed it. What would you say, though, was your childhood favorite that you can remember?
This is going to make you laugh, I think, but I loved Edith Hamilton's mythology. I loved reading about all the Greek gods and all of their petty fights. And I think it was so soapy and dramatic.
Oh
And
my
as a
gosh.
kid, it just really captured me. I loved it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would have never guessed. I would have never guessed. That was not on my bingo card today. Not at all. Oh my gosh, that is so cool though. So cool. What books are you looking forward to reading in the year ahead?
I just started reading Demon Copperhead by
Oh,
Barbara Kingsolver. And I'm looking forward to finishing it. But on the other hand, I don't want it to end because her narrative voice is so incredible. I just want to drown in it. It's amazing.
Oh, I love when that happens. My husband thinks I'm silly. He'd be like, "You're not finished with that one yet?" I'm like, "No, I'm taking my time. I'll come back tomorrow. I don't want it to end." So I know what it feels like to really drag a book out. And that one was really good too. So awesome. Okay, another thing we love our authors, we love our books. We also love our indie bookstores. So share with our listeners some of your favorite local indies.
I have so many favorites, but I'm going to share 2 that are local to me. There's Park Books in Severna Park, Maryland. I am actually doing an event with them this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. And they are going to be carrying my signed books for Becoming Madam Secretary. Whenever you're hearing this, you should be able to get a copy from them that is signed. I also love A Likely Story up in Sykesville, Maryland. And they used to be my local bookstore, but I have moved. So that doesn't mean I don't still love them, though.
Oh, I love that. Love when authors share that indie love. And if you need that signed copy, now you know where to get it. Okay, so kind of wrapping things up and coming back to Becoming Madam Secretary. Again, you've done your job, you've written the book, you've given it to us. I hope that after listening today, or chat has whet the appetite of readers and they'll pick up a copy too. But in an ideal world, what are you hoping readers might think or feel, or what discussions you're hoping they might have after they've turned the last page?
Well, we've touched on some of it. I hope that they are inspired by this book and take away from it that if we are as determined as Frances Perkins was, we really can change the world. And the other thing I hope they take from it is that she is vastly underappreciated in our country, and there should be a street or park named after her in every town in America.
I couldn't agree with you more because, again, when I discovered just her pivotal role in helping to change America and that her legacy lives on in all the programs and services that exist today, yes, I think she deserves a park, she deserves a street name. And who knows, maybe all us readers can get together and hopefully petition something like that. So if you're listening out there, yes, get in touch with us. Maybe we can make it happen. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. You are so knowledgeable and fun.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.